Hello guys, I'm back with another video. This time we're going to be talking about the Mei Reaper composition, why it's good, why it's bad, why the composition around it is good, and its strengths, weaknesses on Busan. Now the reason why I picked Busan is because I feel like it shows the strengths, the weakness, and the weirdness of this composition about how to counter it. So let's talk about the strengths first and how to get the most efficiency from the composition, how it's meant to be played, and things that you can think about when actually playing this comp. So let's talk about Mecha Base first, and the comp. So most people are comparing it to Goats. Now it is kind of like Goats because it is a more macro-based comp in terms of CD usages to get the maximum amount of efficiency and the maximum amount from the pick. So the Reaper Fade allows him to play aggressive and also get, TP around the high mobility and cause chaos. Mei is basically like a tank that has CC, damage, and utility. Reaper is just a tank killer, so it kills the Mei, it kills the D.Va, and it kills the Orisa pretty quickly. Has high amounts of damage, and he has a high amount of survivability due to his lifesteal and his fade, and high amounts of rotation ability because of his TP. So he has the whole package necessary. But he's not really a long-range hit scan, so he can't really deal with things like fair and stuff, which on this map isn't necessarily a problem. So, let's talk about a standard fight, first fight. So there are two rotations on this map, so one left and one right. One is safer than the other, and I'll explain why. So Mei wall is very, very prevalent on this map because there are a lot of chokes that you can abuse. Let's count how many there are. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. 14 chokes you can really abuse. Also, I guess 16, 17. It's 18, 19. So you can abuse a lot of chokes on this map. So choosing your path, left or right, is very, very... You have to commit fully to it. You can't like, oh, I see the enemy team, I need to kind of like stop. You need to commit. You need to take as much map control as possible, as fast as possible. So, in my opinion, obviously it comes down to scouting. If you see the enemy team goes this side more, then you can take this side. Again, it depends on scouting. But there are strengths and weaknesses to doing both of these. So one is the left side. It doesn't have as much map control space. And what I mean by that is the fact that if say for example this blue team does go this rotation, if they do get somebody walled off, they can rotate to point. Or they could just drop down and cycle back and go again. Whereas if the team on the left side gets walled off, they will either have to 1. Force a cooldown to get that person across, 2. Retreat and lose all this map control, so they'll give up the choke, or 3. Die because they'll be down a guy. So let's just say, for example, the team uses different position rotations. So I'm going to use an example here. We're going to use the Gladiators versus Spark first fight. Why Spark lost and why Gladiators won, and what was different about it. So Gladiators, at the first point of contact, they just took all the map control they could. They just kept walking forward, kept walking forward, kept walking forward. They didn't stop. They kept walking forward until they saw Spark. Whereas Spark kind of diddle-daddled around a choke, didn't necessarily take any map control necessarily until they saw Glads, and they were like, oh fuck, they're in our faces now. What we're gonna do? So they kind of like swayed in this position towards Gladiator's side of the map. They kind of like did that. And Gladiators kind of just stood there and applied pressure, shall we say. And Spark kind of panicked. Now I'm going to talk about what Spark did that triggered this whole domino effect. So Gladiators pressured. Spark at this point were kind of like in a panic, it felt like, because they used Mei wall here. And then they used the Orisa pool on top. Now let's talk about why that's important about the Orisa pool. Because it enables and also is a defensive option. It's a defensive option because you can pull people back, pull people into position, and hold them still for a second or two, because a second or two could make a huge difference. And it also enables the Mei because of the pierce on the left click. So they use wall, so the defensive option is gone, and they use another defensive/offensive cooldown. So Gladiators are like, okay then, I'm not going to use any cooldowns because you've walled off your own engage. 2, you don't look like you want to play aggressive, and 3, you don't have anything to really hold us back now, apart from defense matrix. So what gladiators do is they wait for the wall and they play aggressive. They get in their faces. Now this is a super important part about this composition. This composition, in its most effective phase, is a 2-group offense. So what I mean by that, normally it's the Reaper off on his own group, creating pressure, forcing CDs whilst being safe. But in this situation, it is Raw and Decay that use the space and the fact that they've trapped them, because they may wall off behind them so they can't retreat. So it forces them to go towards Glaz's side. But what Raw does is it takes a wide angle using his cooldowns to create space and obviously keep himself safe. And then the rest of the team enables the Reaper to allow him to push into them. But then what happens is, this is the most efficient way of using pull, is Raw pulls all of the people together whilst the Mei is freezing on top of them. Now what does that do? Well, one, if they don't use cooldowns to escape, they're going to get frozen solid. And at this point, Reaper is applying a lot of pressure here, so they're going to be losing a lot of HP in the process. So it's a 2-prong pressure point. Because this team is playing aggressive, I need to play aggressive as well. And I'll talk about that a little bit more about Reaper solo in a little bit. So yeah, they have 2-prong pressure, they force cooldowns. At this point, Gladiators have used 2 cooldowns. 1, the wall, and 2, the pull. But they're getting a lot of value from it, because right now they're about to force Mei Ice Block, Moira Fade, Reaper Fade, and Orisa Harden. That's 4 cooldowns for the price of 2. And they still have the momentum to go forward. So, with that in mind, at this point, Gladiators should win this fight just purely off of CD usages, unless they complete and utterly screw up. So at this point, the Mei is an ice block, and Glads just surround the Mei. And at this point, the Mei is dead. Like, this team needs to either get the hell out and just reset, take the L, and go back to base. But Glads don't allow that. As soon as this happens, Shawfall kites backwards. Now, why does he kite backwards? Well, because he wants to create that 2 group again, like I've said before. Because what happens here is D.Va reignites with the Orisa, so now it's a 1 group. Because Shawfall knows that every single one of the major cooldowns is gone, and the defense matrix is probably being used a lot, Shawfall now can be allowed to do what he wants, basically. He's allowed to free roam. So he TPs out of LOS of the team into the backline. Again, creating that 2-group pressure. And then the rest of the team obviously pushes up and pushes him backwards. The Mei is dead at this point. They keep pushing in. Again, the Mei wall is coming back up so they can Mei wall off the retreat. And then they basically create a 2-prong pressure, because Shawfall hasn't used Fade yet. So if the Reaper still has Fade, he is looking to play as aggressive as possible to get the maximum amount of value from that pick. Because again, Reaper wants to be in your face because he has 2 shotguns. 2, he has a lot of safety because of his lifesteal and because of his Fade. So he needs to get in and use the pressure that his team is creating for that space, because then it will create pressure on the backline and cause a split between Spark, which Glads take full advantage of. And they completely snowballed the fight off because they used the cooldowns correctly and Spark didn't. So that's just like, if you ever want to see how to run a correct fight with Mei Reaper and get the most amount of value from it, watch that fight over and over again, and watch Shawfall and watch the Mei, and watch how they split and create that 2-group pressure. So yeah, that fight was completely gone. Now let's talk about things that you should be looking at as a Reaper player. We're not going to be talking about Spark or Glance anymore. We're going to just be talking about how the Reaper should set up, how the Mei should set up, etc, etc. So the Mei on defense is looking to use the wall to 1, force cooldowns, 2, split off the team, and 3, give your team rotation times to then hold that choke. So let's just say they go high ground. You can wall them off, maybe you'll catch the Orisa, force her harden, kill her, she's out the fight. So the idea is you're trying to find a window to get through. So what should I do if I'm scouting and I know the Mei is playing, let's just say I'm the red team now, and I know the whole team is playing up here. one thing I can do, I can Mei wall off this side with the red team, Mei wall off this side, and use that timing to get everybody out the choke. That is when you just get out of the choke and you try and take a fight in your terms. Whether that be using Bongo, whether that be using the timing for the Reaper to flank, etc, etc. As a defensive team, I'm looking to set up my Reaper in a position to take advantage, again, creating that two-group pressure. So if my Mei's setting up here, I want to set my Reaper up on the other side to force them to focus him, so I create that two-prong attack. Because what's going to happen is, they focus the Reaper, and my team will walk around the wall. I should say the wall only goes to here. They walk around the wall. So what's that doing? It's causing them to go back down the choke, or forcing them out of the choke. But they are dealing with the Reaper, they're dealing with people shooting them in the back, and the Mei wall is about to go down. And obviously, the defensive team still has the wall. So, they're in a bit of a pickle. So they need, again, they need to take as much map control as possible, force this Reaper out as fast as possible. So what I would suggest is the Mei instantly, as soon as you place this wall up, and you take map control, the Mei should be instantly checking your back, and freezing, and pressuring that Reaper out, because you don't want to diddle daddle. You want to take as much map control and get out of this sticky situation as fast as possible. So let's talk about ways that you can abuse Reaper. Let's just say, for example, whatever reason the enemy team is on the objective, they're holding back down here. Whatever reason, I have no idea why you would do it, but let's just say they are. And their Reaper is setting up down here. So, as an offensive team, you should know by now that the enemy team is looking to play around Reaper flanks and create that two-group pressure. So what should you be trying to do? Well, one, you should be trying to set up your Reaper first before you do anything. So if the enemy team allows you to take map control, oblige. Set the Reaper up behind them on the high ground, and while simultaneously pressuring. And also checking your back. You should always be having somebody look behind. You can turn your Lucio around, have a look around. Moira can also turn around, have a quick look. Keep your head on a swivel. As soon as you see this Reaper pressure pushing in, you need to either kite back and let your Reaper distract whilst you're forcing the Reaper out. Because if you force the Reaper back to the team, and then your Reaper's back to the team, you're on even playing field. And now it's all about just basic macro and pressure. So, ways to force the Reaper back are one, boops. You could boop the Reaper backwards, force him to waste more time while your Reaper is in their backline. You could freeze him. Again, you'd have to, your team would have to either hold their ground or kite backwards slowly, because again, you're losing your defensive option and your slow and your freeze to deal with the Reaper and push him out. So it's important that you're, as a Reaper, that you are pressuring the same time as your team to cause disruption and not allow your Reaper to be solely focused out and get no value from him. So again, playing on the point is not a good idea, because at this situation, the red team should win. Actually, it's not necessarily that they should win, but it allows Reaper to get on the high ground and allows you to set up in the same situation as the blue team. So you're giving away the defensive advantage of being able to set up your Reaper. So what I do, maintain high ground. Do not give them the high ground for free. That's one thing, because you're allowing the Reaper to rotate for free, and obviously get into your backline. Things that you could do, obviously you could hold chokes, you could hold the bridge, you could hold on the opposite side, but then again you're still creating that pressure for Reaper to drop down on your head. So you want to try and maintain a spot where Reaper can't get any value and your Reaper can get value. So the thing that I would say is a defensive team that I would kind of try and do, let's just say for example the enemy team is kiting back here. I say I'm the blue team. They're all here. My Reaper would be setting up down in this staircase. Now why would I do that? If I have correct scouting and I know where he's going, what I would do is I would set up my Reaper in this window to begin with, and then I would try and look to use Mei wall. Make sure that everybody's past the choke so nobody gets walled off. So you're looking to use the Mei wall here to split them and force cooldowns. Now if they're probably going to use Mei wall this direction to allow that space, right? And they have the high ground now. So what I would allow them to, I would actually allow the red team to take point control. I'll get to that why. If they use the Mei wall and take this high ground, let them have it, and control your side of the point. Control up here. Control where this is. Because of this reason. If the red team go on the high ground, and you still have the point ticking, they have to go and contest that point. They have to drop down, and they have to get the ticks. At this point, you should be following them back up. Following them up and pressuring them down to the objective. Why? Because, as I said before, if you force the enemy team down on the objective with the Reaper, because he can't set up on the flank because there's no pressure on the map, your Reaper can TP behind and he will be in a perfect position to capitalize as long as your team doesn't get caught off by another wall. So let's just say they drop down on the point from the high ground. They drop down on the opposite side. But your Reaper is in a position, they drop down on the point. Your Reaper is in a position to create pressure from behind whilst your team is pushing the front, whereas their Reaper is stuck in the with his team. Now, as the red team, I would acknowledge that is the whole principle of the composition. So you could do something of a bait. You could allow them to push you off the high ground, and as soon as they drop, speed into them. Because it's kind of like goats, right? You want to get into them, and if they're split, because the Reaper will be behind. As long as you use the timing window correctly and you push at that timing window, this Reaper will be forced to either one or two things: drop down, and he'll be late, or he won't get little to any value in comparison to what this team will do. You'll either trade out, and it's basically just whatever happens at that point. Like it's just mechanical play at that point. And but that's your best situation as the red team, because if you sit there and they, for example, the blue team contest the objective, and your Reaper isn't in a flank position, he isn't getting any value sitting behind the shield. He's just shooting at a shield from like what? His damage fall off is insane. So he's basically like a tracer shooting from that distance. He wants to go in. So at this point, blue team can choose whenever they want to. They could wait for cooldowns. They could wait for ultimates, and then drop down and create that two-group pressure, as I said before. So when should Reaper TP? Let's talk about that real quick. Reaper should TP when he wants to reposition, set up for an aggressive play, a two-group pressure. As I said before, you can TP up here, cause them to split, blah, 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 blah. TP on the high ground above them, blah, blah, blah. But as Reaper, you're trying to get as much value from your shift without using it until you get pressured out, whilst your team is creating that same amount of pressure from a different angle / position. That's basically the TLDR of it. Mei can kind of do the same thing, but Mei wants to kind of stay with the Orisa because she doesn't want to be forced to ice block, because unlike Reaper, Mei can't move in ice block. Yeah, she's invulnerable, but she cannot move, so she's stuck. So she wants to stay with the Orisa so she's not forced to cooldowns, and also the Orisa kind of enables the Mei with the pull. D.Va is a defensive option because, as I said before, it shuts down and obviously enables the composition. D.Va Bomb is also pretty good with combinations. So let's talk about ultimates real quick. How should you use Blizzard? Because a lot of teams just randomly throw it and get no value. So think of it this way. Think of it like Earth Shatter, right? When you used to play the Bash Shatter composition, what used to shut it down? Bubbles. So how did you used to do that? You used to create force that. Sorry, you used to be able to create pressure at a choke and forcing the enemy team to waste that cooldown to get space or take a fight. Then you would stun him and then you would shatter, because they don't have that secondary defensive option after the shield because they've used it prior. So with Blizzard, it's a waste of time throwing it on an Orisa because she's just gonna harden. It's a waste of time throwing it on the Mei because she's just gonna ice block. It's a waste of time throwing it on the Reaper because he's just gonna shift. So what could you use it for? One, you could use it as defensive / map control because it would then force the enemy team to use cooldowns to then close that space, or even engage in that situation. Or you could take a fight, use something like Death Blossom to force said cooldowns, like Defense Matrix so it doesn't get eaten, Harden so that the Orisa doesn't die, Fades, Ice Block, Sound Barriers, and then throw the Mei ultimate. Or obviously what you could do is pressure really aggressively in that two group system, force the cooldowns, and then use the ultimate. Because a lot of Meis I see just randomly throw it and it gets eaten, or randomly throw it and it gets no value because he has shift, she has shift, she has shift, she has shift. It's like no value apart from forcing those cooldowns. Um, which I guess it is value, but it's not like a team fight winning, because if they can if they can run away, then with the speed boost, then it's not getting any value. They can stabilize and come back. But I guess it is getting point control, so I guess it is getting a small minute amount of value in comparison to what it would do if you just force cooldowns beforehand. Um. So yeah, I think that's kind of like how to really abuse it mostly, and what its like core principle of it is. Um, let's talk about real briefly about like its weakness. Very long maps. I'm not gonna do like a composition or anything like that. I'm just gonna talk about it briefly. So Mei is very good on maps like this as a defensive / stabilization / map control, because you can throw up a wall, which is basically like a shield that you can't see through, right? So you could use a shield to block off LOS snipers. You could use it to not force your shield, so you could use it as a shield and then place down your Orisa shield. But Reaper isn't good on a map like this because it has insane sightlines and insane rotation pathing. Because if I'm a Widowmaker, it's easy because the Reaper can't necessarily pressure me unless he uses TP and I don't see him, or my team doesn't see him. But if the enemy team is running a bunker comp and they see Mei Reaper, they're gonna rotate and keep rotating. And because they're running snipers / long range damage, i.e. Pharah or Hanzo or Widow, they're gonna force resources before that Reaper can, because the Reaper would have to do a solo play to get value, and he probably might die, he might be forced his cooldowns, and he gets ultimately no value. So maps like this map in particular, I don't think Reaper Mei is very good, because sightlines, rotations, and the fact that snipers get more value on these specific maps because they can burn CDs from a lot longer distance whilst being safe. So those are the things you need to look at in a map. Is Reaper good here? If the answer is no, then you don't run it. You don't build around it. If Reaper, can they rotate? Is there environmental stuff that I can get killed off of, i.e. well, i.e. Sanctum? Those are two prime examples of cough points that I think the Reaper Mei sucks at, because rotations and sightlines, and obviously the environmental pit where you can get booped off of whilst rotating around those specific positions. So, what do I think a good composition is on this point? I think snipers are good. I think Baptiste is good. I think Pharah is good if you're playing against a Reaper Mei one-trick comp team. But I don't think Reaper is good. I think Shield Break is the most important composition on this map, because obviously it has long sightlines, long rotations, less people. Because around the point, like, where can you necessarily hide? There are a lot of crossfire points that you can flank, play as a sniper, that this drum is completely useless at this point. So compositions that rely around a shield will lose a lot of the time if you don't take map control. So let's talk about a map that. Oh, okay. Why is it not? Hello? Why is it not letting me? Okay, whatever. Wouldn't let me right click. Okay. Let's talk about downtown. Now, this is where I got really angry at Spark the other day, because they ran the mirror comp against Gladiators again. Now, this map is very, very good for two Pacific heroes against Mei Reaper, Pharah and the Widow. Now it kind of depends on how you look at the Widowmaker, because it could be your downfall also. So with the Pharah has a lot of environment to play around, and the point is very, very open, and there are not really a lot of spaces where Reaper can necessarily get value against a Reaper Mei, Pharah Mei, because again, the Pharah has constant pressure because she can fire from a long range distance and has no damage fall off. Whereas Reaper has a lot of damage fall off and has to get into your team. So if your team plays a lot more passively and plays around the Pharah pressure, if the enemy team Reaper goes to point and she's allowed to free fire, who's going to kill her? Your D.Va is going to have to pressure the Pharah, but she can't pressure her all the time. They're going to run out of Matrix. You're going to run out of Moira heals. So you have to play aggressive. So if you're playing the Mei Reaper composition into something like a Pharah comp, you are looking to get a kill or pressure the enemy team enough that you can actually put enough resources into killing the Pharah. You can throw Moira ball at her, you can focus over Moira, you can focus over Dio. I don't know why a Pharah would die to a Moira in that situation, but those are the situations. If you're in that situation, if you see a Pharah on Reaper as Reaper Mei, if you have the opportunity, go back to spawn and swap to a McCree instead of the Reaper, and you can still run that composition. You basically run a rotation-based composition with the hit scan that can pressure the Pharah. But yeah, if you're forced to play the Mei Reaper for whatever situation, your only win condition is to force a fight, play LOS of the Pharah if you can, and then kill the rest of his team before he kills the rest of yours, or forces all of your CDs, because you have decent sustain and a timing window of defense matrix and Moira heals. So Moira can keep you up against the Pharah, but not forever, because obviously she runs out of heals. So the timing window is, as soon as your team plays aggressive, your D.Va will then fly at or hold defense matrix at the Pharah to not let her get any value. So then you're in a 5 versus 4 situation with the Pharah and Mercy being completely useless because the D.Va is eating everything. That is your timing window. If you cannot get value from your defense matrix / D.Va in against Pharah with the Mei Reaper, you will lose. So it's all about that timing window. I think that just about covers most of how I think Mei Reaper should be played against certain compositions, and what I think its weaknesses, and just overall how to play the Mei Reaper. Obviously, I didn't cover most things, but I think most things are common sense. Again, it's kind of like a GOATS macro-based comp. Hope this helped anybody that doesn't understand how to play it, or any teams that don't understand it, or any Reaper players that don't understand. Because a lot of Reapers don't. The Reapers that I see a lot of people playing are kind of playing it like a McCree, and like I'm just thinking like, you have a shift, you have so much survivability, yet you're not using any part of your kit because you're not aggressive enough. You're not using your team pressure enough, or you're not setting the tempo. Like as the Reaper, you are the one setting the tempo, and you are the one dominating, forcing resources, asking for resources. You should be the most vocal one in terms of like when to push, how he wants to set up, etc. In my opinion, at least. But if you have a very quiet DPS player, it's very difficult to run that sort of style because they're not talking. Yeah, that's my rundown of Mei Reaper. I hope you learned something. If you did, leave a like. If you didn't, let me know in the comments what you thought of the video and how I can improve it. Okay, thank you guys for watching. Peace.